And here we are with our host, Dr. Bill O'Brien, on the Virtual Center for the Study of the Constitution and Civic Responsibility.
Thank you, Agnes, and welcome to a Wednesday edition of the Virtual Center for the Study of the Constitution and Civic Responsibility. Today is the fourth day of January in the new year of 2017. The sun is out. We've got a little bit of snow flying around here as the temperature drops precipitously. Early this morning, it was in the 50s. It's now in the low 30s. Welcome to a Wednesday edition of the Virtual Center for the Study of the Constitution and Civic Responsibility. It's a pleasure to be with you. This is our third consecutive day of live programs here, and I'm really excited about that fact as well. We do invite you to participate actively in our program. We have a phone number, and if you call, Agnes is in the studio, and you will be on the air momentarily. Our phone number is area code 304-663-4676. 304-663-4676. My email address, if you'd like to communicate directly with me one-on-one via email, is waobrien906@gmail.com. That's waobrien, O-B-R-I-E-N, 906@gmail.com. And finally, I do call your attention to our Facebook page. If you are a regular user of Facebook, just go to the homepage, and on the search box at the top, just type in the Virtual Center for the Study of the Constitution, and you will be into our Facebook page, and you will have access to the postings that I've been able to put there in recent days. As I promised yesterday at the beginning of our program, I did post an entry on Facebook yesterday, which was very consistent with the program that we did yesterday, namely the story of Jefferson and Hamilton and the role that Hamilton played in the selection of Thomas Jefferson as President of the United States in the disputed election of 1800. Jefferson referred to it later on in his writings as the Revolution of 1800. And of course, what he meant by that is that this is the first time in modern history that political power passed from one party to another without some sort of military action or police control or revolution or something like that. It was the first peaceful transition of power in the modern world. And of course, as you know, our two-party system has enabled us to do that consistently ever since. And as we talked about on yesterday's program, there's some concern among many people now that record of uninterrupted peaceful transitions of power might be on the verge of ending. We know that President Obama has made it very clear that he intends to do everything he can to ensure a peaceful transition to the new administration scheduled to take power in 16 days. But many people are concerned about it. Many people are probably more concerned about the future of the republic than they've been in a long time. So I do believe that there are some real issues of concern here, real issues of political relevance, and I believe time will tell, or time will show us that they have historical relevance as well. And so I think in today's program, we're going to be investigating a lot of this. And what I'd like to do at the beginning of our program today is return to the topic that we closed yesterday's program with, which was the analogy, if you will, or the analysis of the role that Hamilton played in the disputed election of 1800. And by disputed, what I mean is, of course, that no candidate received the necessary votes in the Electoral College to be selected president. So consequently, Aaron Burr and Thomas Jefferson, the two leading candidates for the presidency in 1800, found themselves in the political turmoil of having the House of Representatives decide who indeed would be president of the United States. The House of Representatives was controlled by the Federalist Party. And as we know, the Federalist Party was controlled by Alexander Hamilton. So what that effectively meant was that Alexander Hamilton was going to have an inordinate role to play in determining which of these two men, Aaron Burr or Thomas Jefferson, would be president of the United States. And as we discussed yesterday, throughout the 1790s, for the 10 years prior to 1800, Hamilton and Jefferson had pretty much been at odds, politically, philosophically, and every other way. The major issue, of course, was the ongoing struggle between Great Britain and France, which resumed in Europe, and the existence of the alliance that the colonies, the former British colonies, 13 colonies, had made with France in 1778. That many people who study the Revolution point out, for example, that without French support, we probably would not have been successful in gaining our independence from Great Britain. And the existence of this French alliance of 1778 resulted in the fact that the French government in the 90s believed that in its struggle for Great Britain, the United States had a contractual or a treaty obligation to support it in its continued war with Great Britain. Hamilton, on the other hand, from his perspective as Secretary of the Treasury, believed that the future economic viability and stability of the nation depended on maintaining good, close relations with Britain because of Britain's manufacturing capability and the worldwide market system that Britain had established throughout the world. So Hamilton believed that the future economic viability of the United States itself depended on close relations with Britain. The result of that was the split of the two parties during the 1790s, the hostility that existed between the two parties during the administration of John Adams from 96 up until 1800, and then the disputed election of 1800, which threw the decision over President of the United States into the House of Representatives. And because of the track record of hostility between Jefferson and Hamilton, most people believed that Hamilton would use his influence to keep Jefferson out of the presidency. But the fact of the matter is, and this we covered pretty much yesterday, the fact of the matter is that Hamilton used his influence to gain the support within the House of Representatives for Thomas Jefferson as president. Because the fact of the matter was that as much as Hamilton was opposed to Jefferson's politics and his attitude and philosophy toward government, the fact of the matter is Hamilton believed that Jefferson was safe, politically safe, that he would only go so far in implementing ideas that Hamilton believed were crazy, were dangerous and hypocritical. He believed that Jefferson's faith in the nation and Jefferson's concern about his own reputation, his own popularity in the eyes of the American people would mean that he would only go so far in pushing his what Hamilton believed were fanatical ideas, and that ultimately Jefferson would compromise. He would only go so far and no further. On the other hand, he believed that there were no limitations on the behavior and the on what Aaron Burr would do. For Burr, according to Hamilton, there were no principles, no constraints. Burr would do whatever and anything he needed to do in order to secure power and influence to himself. And if it meant the destruction of the Republic, Hamilton believed that Aaron Burr would indeed sacrifice the stability of the Republic in exchange for his own political power. We looked at this yesterday, this struggle, in some of the literature, the letters and I'm basically trying to get my paperwork together here. The letters that Hamilton wrote in which he explained his attitude towards Aaron Burr. And much of this was published last Friday in the Washington Post in an op-ed piece by Dana Milbank, in a piece entitled, "Hamilton Helped Elect His Rival to Keep an Unruly Tyrant from the Presidency." And that unruly tyrant, of course, in Hamilton's mind, was Aaron Burr. And the point I would make is, we quoted extensively yesterday, because Dana Milbank does, from a letter that Hamilton wrote to a Federalist colleague of his in Delaware, James Bayard, Federalist from Delaware. But the fact of the matter is, it's not only that one communication. As Milbank points out, Hamilton issued similar warnings throughout 1800 and 1801 in letters to James Ross of Pennsylvania, John Rutledge of South Carolina, Oliver Wolcott of Connecticut, and Gouverneur Morris of New York. In other words, Hamilton made it very clear in many of those he communicated regularly with the danger of an Aaron Burr presidency. To repeat, and again, I had conversation last evening and found that that a number of folks really found these particular quotes to be quite revealing. So I wanted to use this opportunity in this review at the beginning of our program today to share some of them with you again, because I think they are that significant. Hamilton, in his communications with James Bayard of Delaware, acknowledged that he believed Jefferson's positions and politics were, to quote Hamilton, tinctured with fanaticism, and that at times Jefferson was a contemptible hypocrite, he referred to him. But the fact of the matter is, Hamilton believed that Jefferson was safe. Therefore, that the Republic would be safe under a presidency of Thomas Jefferson. He said in the letter to James Bayard, "Jefferson is not zealot enough to do anything in terms of his principles which will contravene his popularity or his interest." In other words, when it comes to his own reputation, his own popularity, Jefferson will back off in order to preserve those. Hamilton goes on, "He is as likely as any man I know to temporize." And I'd ask you to think and reflect upon the word temporize. What temporize means is compromise. Tone down the extremes. Find middle ground. Find a moderate solution. In other words, one who is willing to temporize is somebody who is safe. And Hamilton is very aware of that, and he explains it very well. Jefferson, Hamilton said, is as likely as any man I know to temporize, to calculate what will be likely to promote his own reputation and advantage. And the probable result of such a temper is the preservation of systems, though originally opposed, which being once established could not be overturned without danger to the person who did it. Once Jefferson realizes that if he goes too far, it's going to jeopardize his own reputation and backfire on him, he'll back off. Add to this, Hamilton says, that there is no fair reason to suppose him capable of being corrupted, which is a security that he will not go beyond certain limits. To put that in a nutshell, Hamilton believed that Jefferson was safe, that an awful lot of Jefferson was rhetoric. It was talk. It was not action. That Jefferson would only go so far and no further because he was more concerned about his own reputation than anything else. But the other factor to point out that Hamilton is not totally opposed to Jefferson, he makes the point that Jefferson cannot be corrupted. He's not capable of being corrupted. And that, to Hamilton, means that he'll go so far and no further. He is not corruptible. He is constrained and guided by principles, by values, by ideals. He has the future and the virtue of the country, the security of the country at heart, and he won't jeopardize those. So Hamilton's conclusion then is, when it comes to the choice of President of the United States, Jefferson is the best choice. And then he goes on in the letter to James Bayard and addresses the issue of Aaron Burr. Aaron Burr, on the other hand, compared to Jefferson, Hamilton says, is more cunning than wise, inferior in real ability to Jefferson. Burr, Hamilton believes, doesn't have the depth or the integrity of Jefferson. Burr is cunning, but he's not wise. He's not as sharp as Jefferson. And then Hamilton says, and this was the quote that I opened the posting that I put on our Facebook page last evening on this particular issue. Hamilton says, great ambition unchecked by principle is an unruly tyrant. Somebody who is so ambitious that there's nothing they won't do, no limits to what they'll do in order to gain and fulfill their personal ambitions, means that they are potentially tyrants and must be stopped. And that, to Hamilton, is the description of Aaron Burr that he believes is most appropriate. He says that Burr is trafficking in the floating passions of the multitude, and that this would lead him to endeavor to disorganize both parties and form out of them a third, composed of men fitted by their characters to be conspirators. Burr would literally destroy the two-party system that lays at the heart of the functioning of our republic. He would do it in order to build a cadre of conspirators whose primary loyalty was to him, not to the nation. Therefore, he's a potential tyrant. He must be stopped. He can't be allowed to become president of the United States. And I think we quoted this particular item from the Bayard letter yesterday as well. When Burr, according to Hamilton, when Burr is confronted with the fact that something he wants to do is not legal, is not permitted under our American system, Hamilton says, Burr replies, great souls care little about small things. In other words, let's not be blocked by small details. Let's not sweat the small stuff. To Hamilton, what this means is he'll violate principle, he'll violate the law, he'll violate tradition, he'll do whatever it takes to gain the advantage that he seeks. And this is a fairly extensive paragraph in the letter to Bayard about Aaron Burr. He is of a temper, Hamilton says, to undertake the most hazardous enterprises because he's sanguine enough to think nothing impracticable, and of an ambition which will be content with nothing less than permanent power in his own hands. The maintenance of the existing institutions will not suit him, because under them his power will be too narrow and too precarious. Yet the innovations he may attempt will not offer the substitute of a system that is durable and safe, calculated to give lasting prosperity and to unite liberty with strength. It will be instead the system of the day, sufficient to serve his own and not looking beyond himself. Hamilton closes the letter by saying, "The truth is that under forms of government like ours, too much is practicable to men who will without scruple avail themselves of the bad passions of human nature." When it comes down to the bottom line between Jefferson and Aaron Burr, Hamilton believes there is absolutely no question that if you care for the future of the nation, Jefferson is the only safe selection for President of the United States. And the result, of course, is that Jefferson indeed becomes President of the United States in 1800. There's absolutely no question, then, as to the basis and the depth of the hatred for Alexander Hamilton by Aaron Burr. The duel that is going to take Hamilton's life a couple of years after this is hardly a surprise. It appears that every time Aaron Burr runs into a political roadblock, as he pursues his ambitions in New York and indeed in national politics, it's Alexander Hamilton more than anybody else that seems to be in his way. The duel is not a surprise. The reason I mention this is because I think the comparison that Hamilton makes between Burr and Jefferson is a revealing one. It basically deals with a person, a personality that seeks change, in many cases significant change, but not to the point that it will disrupt or make unstable the entire political system, the republic itself. As opposed to somebody whose personality is such that he is driven by personal ambition and the search for power. And there are no constraints, no limits on what that particular person would do in order to achieve his personal ambitions. That, and this is the point that we closed our program with yesterday, that, I believe, is what many people believe we may be confronting in 16 days with the transition of power from the Obama administration to the Trump administration. Everywhere you look, everywhere you read, this theme seems to jump out at you. Last evening, for example, 9 to 10, I watched Rachel Maddow, and I watched her in a one-on-one with Chuck Schumer, the incoming just elected head of the Democratic minority in the U.S. Senate. And Schumer was laying out strategy as to how successful the Democratic Party he believed could be in blocking some of the legislation and some of the promises that Donald Trump has been making since the election of November 8th. One of the things that Schumer said that I think is very significant is that the American people need to know that the Democratic minority in the Senate, even though we are a minority, he said, We will not negotiate or compromise on our principles. There are certain things that we will not give in on. We will not back down on Social Security. We will not back down on the Affordable Care Act. We will not back down on Medicare. We will not back down on our commitment to help people find jobs and to restore this economy. He points out that there are a number of things that he believes the Democratic Party will be able to work positively and effectively with the new Republican majority. But he made very clear that the Democratic Party is using this time prior to the inauguration to clearly define its principles in order to make sure that to a person, the Democratic Party will do everything that it can do to maintain what he believes is the principled positions of the Democratic Party. The reason that I think that particular exchange, was significant was because one of the things that President Obama has been criticized for is his willingness, almost from the very beginning of his first term, to find common ground with the Republicans, to find places where he could compromise. And the fact of the matter is, the Republican majority was committed to obstruction. They obviously made President Obama's administrations very difficult. And I think history is going to have to basically look at what Obama was able to accomplish in light of the opposition he faced. Chuck Schumer's position is that the new Republican majority is going to face similar opposition from Democrats. And he obviously he seemed very optimistic about their ability to obstruct, to block. And some of us, for example, are thinking, and this has occurred to me, we've just gone through 8 years of obstruction of a Congress that seemingly accomplished very little. And now we're looking to a Democratic minority to accomplish the same thing, rather than working together. Part of the reason, obviously, is because the entire presentation that Schumer made last evening was based on the premise that much of what the Trump administration stands for and wants to do is contrary to the principles of the Democratic Party, and he was very firm in his statement that the Democratic Party would not compromise on those principles. So it looks like we're looking at a possibility of additional obstruction going on in our government. This is extremely a very, very bad political situation, I believe. So again, I think that everywhere you look, on television, on panel shows, in op-ed pieces, there seems to be this basic sense that what the nation is in for is a degree of change that the American people probably did not appreciate when they voted Donald Trump in as President of the United States. And the emphasis is continually made, references continually made to the point that in spite of the fact that Donald Trump and his spokesman continue to argue that he has some sort of mandate from the American people, the fact of the matter is more than 2.8 million people voted for Hillary Clinton than they did for Donald Trump. Almost 3 million popular votes more went to Hillary Clinton than Donald Trump. So therefore, that raises serious questions about the Trump administration's claim of any kind of a mandate. But the fact of the matter is, every administration seeks to try to sell the idea that it has a mandate. What I'd like to do, and we did a little bit of this yesterday, but I'd like to pursue it today in a little bit more depth, is to focus on this idea that Hamilton presents of the differences between Jefferson and Aaron Burr. Because the irony of the situation is that while there's clearly a personality difference that Hamilton cites as his reasons for his willingness to support Jefferson for the presidency, the fact of the matter is there is a common theme to both Jefferson and Aaron Burr, and that is their ability to appeal to the masses of the people. One of the things that I think we need to confront is that throughout history, it almost seems that the same strategies are being used in order to challenge those in power by those out of power. Those out of power continually claim, they always do, that they speak for the people and that they are able to successfully represent the will and the needs of the people. I would suggest to you that is the appeal that Donald Trump made in the election that was just held in this nation. Donald Trump was successfully able to basically sell the idea to the masses of the people who supported him most avidly that he was their best hope, that he could fix the things that nobody else seemed able or willing to fix, that he could fix foreign policy in such a way that America could begin to win again, that America could become great once again. The implication being that we were on top, and somehow we've allowed that position to abandon us. Donald Trump promises to bring it back. He promises those who support him that he will bring back the good old days, the times when people were doing well, when they were optimistic, when people could dream and hope. Fact of the matter is, it worked. And one of the things we find, and this also in Hamilton, is that Hamilton makes regular, frequent references to the conspiracy of Catiline toward the end of the Roman Republic, and Catiline's efforts to overthrow the Republic by enlisting a cadre of conspirators within the Senate who planned to assassinate key members of the Senate as part of their takeover. The history of this conspiracy is left to us by the Latin historian Sallust. And in his historical account of the Catiline conspiracy, Sallust presents the quotation, the speech that Catiline delivered to the conspirators prior to the failed conspiracy. What happens, of course, is the conspiracy is revealed. Cicero finds out about it. Catiline is forced to flee the country and ultimately is assassinated in battle, is killed in battle. Yesterday, we had an opportunity at the very end of our program to share a few of the most prominent statements from the speech that Catiline delivered to the conspirators. There are a couple of themes that I think we can look for as we listen to this speech by Catiline to the conspirators. One is the extent to which Catiline seeks to convince those he's trying to enlist in his conspiracy the fact that he is one of them, that he feels their pain, that what he is advocating and asking them to do is what they must do in order to fix a bad situation. He is promising them that what he stands for is what they need, that he is their champion, that he is one of them. I would suggest to you that if you think back to the campaign that Donald Trump has won, that is exactly the approach that Donald Trump took in this past election to win what history is going to recount as one of the most surprising elections in the nation's history. It's very obvious that the polls were wrong. The media was wrong. More and more of the media were convinced that Hillary was going to win. Hillary's people were convinced they were going to win. All they had to do was continue to attack the personality, the reputation, and the behavior of Donald Trump, and the American people would come to their senses and realize that this guy shouldn't be president of the United States. What they missed, obviously, was the depth of the anger and frustration that many Americans felt. And I think that's what all of us need to appreciate. Let me share, if I can, a couple of the key paragraphs that Catiline uses in his address to the conspirators. Quote, "If your courage and fidelity," he said, "had not been sufficiently proved to me, this favorable opportunity would have occurred to no purpose." In other words, if I didn't know that you people had the courage and the honor to join me in this endeavor, then this favorable opportunity would have no point. Mighty hopes, absolute power, would in vain be within our grasp, nor should I, depending on irresolution or fickle-mindedness, pursue contingencies instead of certainties. But as I have, on many remarkable occasions, experienced your bravery and your attachment to me, I have ventured to engage in a most important and glorious enterprise. I am aware, too, that whatever advantages or evils affect you, the same affect me. And to have the same desires and the same aversions is assuredly a firm bond of our friendship. What Catiline is doing is convincing those he seeks to enlist in his conspiracy that he feels their pain, that what they want is what he wants. What he stands for is what they want and what they need. He goes on, "What I have been meditating, you have already heard separately, but my ardor for action is daily more and more excited when I consider what our future condition of life must be unless we ourselves assert our claims to liberty." What he said is, my desire to move on this, to take action, is excited whenever I reflect on the fact that if we don't seize this opportunity to seize our claims to liberty, we'll be forever lost. He continues, "For since the government has fallen under the power and jurisdiction of a few, kings and princes have constantly been their tributaries. Nations and states have paid them taxes. But all the rest of us, however brave and worthy, whether noble or plebeian, have been regarded as a mere mob, without interest or authority, and subject to those to whom, if the state were in a sound condition, we should be a terror." What Catiline is suggesting is that to the few people who are controlling everything, we are a threat. We are a danger. We need to be stopped. We're just members of a mob. That's the way they look at us. Hence, all influence, power, honor, and wealth are in their hands, or where they dispose of them. To us, they have left only insults, dangers, prosecutions, and poverty. To such indignities, bravest of men, how long will you submit? Is it not better to die in a glorious attempt than, after having been the sport of other men's insolence, to resign a wretched and degraded existence with ignominy? What he's basically saying is, this is worth it. There's no turning back. We've got to give it a try. It's better if we try and don't make it than it will be to not try at all, because we will forever regret the opportunity that we have allowed to slip through our fingers. But success, in parentheses, he says, I call gods and men to witness. Remember, Sallust, the historian, is writing this. But success, I call gods and men to witness, is in our own hands. Our years are fresh. Our spirit is unbroken. Among our oppressors, on the contrary, through age and wealth, a general debility has been produced. We have therefore only to make a beginning. The course of events will accomplish the rest. That short paragraph, I would suggest to you, says tons. Because what that paragraph indicates is that we are the young, we are the vigorous, we are the ones who can pull this off. And those who are our oppressors, because of their age and their wealth, they have become lazy. Therefore, they are vulnerable. This is our time to strike, he is saying. Who in the world, indeed, that has the feelings of a man can endure that they should have a superfluity of riches, to squander in building overseas and leveling mountains, and that means should be wanting to us, even for the necessaries of life. Let me read that again, because I think it's very, very revealing. Who in the world, Catiline says, indeed, that has the feelings of a man, can endure that they should have a superfluity of riches, to squander in building overseas and leveling mountains, and that means should be wanting to us even for the necessaries of life, that they should join together 2 houses or more, and that we should not have a hearth to call our own. In other words, what Catiline is pointing to is the extreme gap between the wealth of the few and the poverty of the many. A few have it all, the rest of us have nothing. They have 2 or more houses, we don't have anything, he's saying. In other words, he is making the case for the fact that when you think about it, you can't not participate in this. They, though they purchase pictures, statues, and embossed plate, though they pull down new buildings and erect others, and lavish and abase their wealth in every possible method, yet cannot, with the utmost efforts of caprice, exhaust it. But for us there's poverty at home, debts abroad. Our present circumstances are bad, our prospects much worse. And what, in a word, have we left but a miserable existence? I would suggest to you that what Catiline is expressing here are the thoughts and the mentality of those who supported the candidacy of Donald Trump the strongest. This is the constituency that the pollsters and the media missed. Notice that Catiline is basically focusing on exactly the same issues that we face today. While they lavish in wealth, while they spread their wealth around everywhere, they can't exhaust it because they've got so much. But for us, there's poverty at home, debts abroad, our present circumstances are bad, our prospects much worse, and what, in a word, have we left but a miserable existence? Can you remember toward the end of the campaign when Donald Trump was making an appeal to African Americans to support him? And I can remember the speech that he delivered in Milwaukee, in the white suburbs of Milwaukee, in which he made an appeal to African Americans and basically said, what the hell do you have to lose? Your streets are unsafe. You can't find jobs. Your schools are terrible. Your kids are at risk. What the hell do you have to lose? Give me a chance. That's exactly what Catiline is saying to the conspirators in his effort to build a movement that would topple the Roman Republic. Let me read one more paragraph, and then we'll try to go back and put all of this together. Will you not, Catiline says, then, awake to action? Behold that liberty for which you have so often wished, with wealth, honor, and glory, are set before your eyes. All these prizes fortune offers to the victorious. Let the enterprise itself then, let the opportunity, let your poverty, your dangers, and the glorious spoils of war animate you far more than my words. Use me either as your leader or your fellow soldier. Neither my heart nor my hand shall be wanting to you. These objects I hope to effect in concert with you in the character of consul, unless indeed my expectation deceives me and you prefer to be slaves rather than masters. That, I would suggest to you, is a pretty powerful call for revolution. One thing that is clear in all of this is that the Roman Republic has reached a point of danger. Notice the substance of what Catiline is saying. He is talking about the extremes between wealth and poverty that define the Roman Republic. He is saying in no uncertain terms that the power and wealth in the Republic have gone to the very few at the expense of the many, and this is the only avenue left for the many to take power back. What this tells us, it seems to me, what Catiline is telling us, is that the Roman Republic is in danger of collapse. And we are the ones who are going to make it happen. It tells us that the Roman Republic has ceased to be a republic at all. It has become the private property of the wealthiest individuals in it at the expense of others. The Roman Republic has ceased to be a republic at all. It has become what we call today a plutocracy, where power, wealth, and influence have gone to the few at the expense of the many. 3 years ago, in 2013, a French economist named Thomas Piketty published a book which took the world by storm. We talked about it here extensively at the Virtual Center. The title of his book, Capital in the 21st Century. In that book, Thomas Piketty included the kind of data in a book that approached, I believe, more than 600 pages. He included data and charts and graphs to demonstrate that inequality was inherent in capitalism. That capitalism, as a theory of economic development, could not happen without the existence of inequality. And that the only way that popular Republican government could be preserved within the confines of capitalism was if a concerted effort was made by government to control and manage the degree of inequality. The last thing, Piketty says, that a republic or a popular government can afford is total freedom with no regulation on the degree of inequality which is inherent in the economic system. Because without management, regulation, and control, the inequality will continue to get wider and wider and wider. We are seeing it in our nation today. Catiline spoke to it in the Roman Republic 2 centuries ago. Piketty wrote in 2013 about inequality. He issued the warning. He laid down the gauntlet. Little has happened thus far. This is an article that appeared last Friday, December 30th, the title of which says that, quote, income inequality is off the charts. Can local policies make a difference? The income gap between the classes is growing at a startling pace in the United States. In 1980, 36 years ago, when Ronald Reagan was elected, the top 1% earned on average 27 times more than the workers in the bottom 50%. Today, that 27 times the salary has gone up 81 times more. Thomas Piketty, in his latest research, has shown that what he calls the widening gap that is producing the inequality in America today is, quote, due to a boom in capital income, unquote. That means the rich are living off their wealth rather than investing it in businesses that create jobs, which is what Republican supply-side economics predicts that they would do. The system, as capitalism is laid out and is supposed to work, is not working because the wealthiest individuals are living off their capital income. They are not investing, they are not putting it back into the system in order to expand the opportunities for other people in the economy. They are investing in buildings, they are investing in hotels, they are investing in art, in paintings, in sculpture, which is exactly what Catiline tells us is happening in the Roman Republic. For those in the top 1%, Piketty says, income rose 205%. In his latest working paper, Piketty reports that the average national income per adult grew by 61% in the United States between 1980 and 2014, but only the highest earners benefited from any of that growth. The average national income per person grew by 61%, but only the highest earners got all of it. For those in the top 1%, income rose 205%. Meanwhile, the average pre-tax income of the bottom 50% of workers remained unchanged, stagnating at about $16,000 per adult after adjusting for an inflation. This article, written by Theo Anderson, concludes with the following statement. An economy that fails to deliver growth for half of its people for an entire generation is bound to generate discontent with the status quo and a rejection of establishment politics. I would suggest to you that the election of Donald Trump is the rejection of establishment politics. The election of Donald Trump represents an effort by the discontented, the disgruntled, the angry, the frustrated, the helpless, the hopeless to change direction. The implication is that all that has been done has been not to our benefit, but at our expense. And that what we seek is change. We don't care that Donald Trump insults disabled people. We don't care that Donald Trump insults women. We don't care that Donald Trump promises waterboarding and much worse. We don't care that Donald Trump insults Mexicans by suggesting that Hispanics are rapists and criminals and murderers. We don't care that Donald Trump is willing to change the face of this nation, which is represented by the Statue of Liberty, in order to welcome immigrants to our shores by suggesting that we don't want any more. All of that stuff, which the Clinton campaign aimed at Donald Trump, is stuff we don't care about. The fact of the matter is, those who have been in power, those who have been responsible for the jobs and the investments which provide opportunity to us for years and years and years, have taken advantage of us. And we want to change. And this guy is promising change. And damn it, whatever evidence you have that suggests he's not worthy of being president, we don't care about. He promises us change, and anything that happens as a result is better than more of what we've been getting. Isn't that the same presentation, the very same issue that Catiline laid out to the conspirators in the Roman Republic? And it wasn't too long after this that the Republic did indeed fall and fell to a dictator, Julius Caesar. The same thing happened in Germany after World War I, and Germany looked to a dictator, to a savior, and that savior was Adolf Hitler. American voters today look to a savior, and they found it in the person of one Donald Trump. It's an incredible story. It is only a story, but I think it is a story that demands reflection and thought. It basically suggests that there's an awful lot of soul searching that needs to happen in our nation, and quickly. Because in the process of instituting the change that this election was about, we are at risk of losing everything in the system that we have believed matters. That, I would suggest to you, is what is at issue. And I think all of us need to do whatever we can do to reflect upon this and try to understand it. We've gone a little bit beyond the top of the hour. We're 3 minutes after the hour. So we're going to pause now, and we're going to take our 5-minute break, as we usually do in our full 2-hour programs on Mondays and Wednesdays. You're listening to the Virtual Center for the Study of the Constitution and Civic Responsibility. After a 5-minute break, we'll be right back with our second hour. I hope that you'll stay with us. Thank you. Thank you, Bob Kincaid. Wow, what a day today is. We've heard from Agnes in the first hour.
You didn't expect me to be here, did you?
Bob. No, I didn't, buddy. Thank you.
I've just been sitting here in rapt attention. You know how I am. You go running off into the classics, and my pink little ears perk right up.
Oh, I'll tell you. Well, Bob, it's a pleasure to chat with you. Thank you.
I will not keep you from your appointed rounds, Dr. Bill.
No, that's okay. Feel free to join us at any time, Bob. Welcome to our second hour here on this Wednesday. Today is the 4th day of January in the new year of 2017. It is a pleasure to be with you for the third day in a row live here at the Virtual Center. If you are just joining us, we welcome you for our second hour. And I will tell you that if you were able to be with us yesterday, then much of what we did in our first hour today was pretty much, I think, a smoother edition, perhaps we could say, of what we did yesterday. At least I hope so. We looked at the controversy between Hamilton and Jefferson. We looked at the basis of Hamilton's serious concerns about the personality of Aaron Burr, which caused him to use his influence to support the candidacy of Thomas Jefferson for President of the United States in the Federalist-controlled House of Representatives after the disputed election of 1800. Then we looked at the degree to which the Catiline conspiracy, which Hamilton makes reference to over and over again. There are I've seen at least 5 different times that Hamilton uses Catiline in order to characterize his opponents. Basically, what he is saying is that those who would pose the greatest threat to the Republic are those who claim to speak for the best interests of the people, those whose claims to represent the best interests of the people are, as Hamilton believed Aaron Burr was, using the needs of the people in order to rationalize their own personal ambition and self-interest. And oftentimes Hamilton will use Catiline's name in order to explain what they were talking about. In an article that appeared, actually, this was a graduate paper done by a PhD candidate at the University of New Hampshire, as I recall. Let me check my sources here just to make sure. Joanna Kenty is a postdoctoral fellow in the Department of Classics, Humanities, and Italian Studies at the University of New Hampshire. And this is a paper she put together on Alexander Hamilton's, what she called Alexander Hamilton's obsession with Catiline. Basically, what Hamilton did was revert to the classics. to Catiline in order to characterize his opponents. And I would suggest to you that, in fact, she makes the statement. I think it's a brilliant statement. And what she says is the following. The founding fathers often used classical historical figures, just as we today use the founding fathers, as an exalted source of inspiration, viewed nostalgically as better people from a better time, who were equal to the challenges they faced, at least in the long run. I think that is a brilliant observation on Kenty's part. And that is that many of us today will use the founders, quote the founders, in order to justify a particular position, suggesting that the founders were better people in a better time than we are living in today. And what she points out is the founders went to the classics for the same thing. They would go back to Rome and Greece and quote there in order to do the same thing that we do today. Then she, as I say, her paper is about what she calls Hamilton's obsession with Catiline. And she basically looks at the period of the 1790s, the controversy between Hamilton and Jefferson, which unfolds throughout the 1790s. And she cites examples, and I'll just give you some of these examples because I think the research called for here would indicate that if you go to the sources and find these particular newspaper articles, you will really get the full story of this controversy between Hamilton and Jefferson. I will suggest to you that this is a search that I plan to make. What she points out is that Hamilton wrote 3 essays for the Gazette of the United States because he was convinced that Jefferson was attacking the Federalist administration, his administration as Secretary of the Treasury, in the National Gazette in order to attack the Washington administration and Hamilton's plans on the national debt. In response, Hamilton wrote 3 essays for the Gazette of the United States, and in these essays he used the pen name An American. There he made accusations against Jefferson to that effect. In response, he received a response from Aristides, who basically denied that Mr. Jefferson is the patron and the promoter of national disunion, national insignificance, public disorder, and discredit as the Catiline of the day, or as the ambitious incendiary who would light a torch to the ruin of his country. I think this is really interesting. Later on, Hamilton returns. This time he takes the name Catullus, and he writes a series of essays attacking Aristides. Hamilton says in one of the Catullus letters that those he refers to, of course, early in the 90s, he's still referring to his opponents, the Jeffersonians, as anti-federalists. And he basically says the following. This is the indication, the criticism of Hamilton for the positions and the policies that Jefferson is advocating. Hamilton says, quote, the never-to-be-satiated lovers of innovation and change, the tribe of pretended philosophers, but real fabricators of chimeras and paradoxes, the Catilines and the Caesars of the community, who leading the dance to the tune of liberty without law, endeavor to intoxicate the people with delicious but poisonous draughts to render them the easier victims of their rapacious ambition. What Hamilton is accusing Jefferson and his followers of in the early 90s is demagoguery. He is accusing Jefferson and the leadership of the Republican opposition in Congress of using the interests of the people as tools for their own personal ambition. He is accusing them of being no different than Catiline in the conspiracy to overthrow the Roman Republic. I think this terminology of Hamilton's is absolutely infectious. I love this phrase from that particular quote. The dance to the tune of liberty without law. The dance to the tune of liberty without law. Hamilton is suggesting that these people are promising freedom to people and proposing something that smacks of anarchy. The idea that freedom means doing what you want with no order, no rules, no principles. And of course, to that, Hamilton believes we must fight back. I'd like to move a little bit beyond this particular issue. And I'd like to go back to something that all of us are quite familiar with here at the Virtual Center. I'm trying to get my paperwork under control here. I'd like to return, you're not going to believe this, to Madison's Federalist number 10. Because I think a second look at Madison's Federalist number 10, in light of the context that we've developed now for the last 2 days, by linking together Hamilton's criticisms of Jefferson, his criticisms of Aaron Burr, I think it's important to recognize the difference between his criticism of Jefferson and his criticism of Aaron Burr. And then Hamilton's reliance to Catiline, and mainly the speech to the conspirators by Catiline. I think with that background or that context in mind, it might be good for all of us to return to the basics, namely Madison's Federalist number 10. I'm not going to go through the whole document, obviously, but I want to focus on a portion of it because I think it fits here. In the middle of Federalist number 10, about halfway through it, what we have come to is this point in Federalist number 10, and I'm paraphrasing, I'm basically reviewing here. You remember that that Madison made the point that the greatest threat to popular government is faction. And then he explains that there are minority factions and there are majority factions. His major concern is the majority faction, what he later calls pure democracy, majority rule. The purpose of the republic, Madison says, the nature of the Constitution is to render impossible the organization of the majority faction. This is the way Madison explains it in Federalist number 10. If a faction Madison says, consists of less than a majority. Relief is supplied by the Republican principle, which enables the majority to defeat its sinister views by regular vote. Translation: while a faction can be a majority or a minority of the whole, Madison clearly points out that if the faction is a minority faction, if it's less than a majority, then relief is supplied by the Republican principle, which enables the majority to defeat it. What Madison is saying then is that our major threat is not the minority faction, but the majority faction. As far as a minority faction is concerned, Madison says, it may clog the administration, it may convulse society, but it will be unable to execute and mask its violence under the forms of the Constitution. Basically, what he's saying is, we don't need to worry that much about minorities because the majority in a republic will always control it and outvote it. But, Madison says, when a majority is included in a faction, the form of popular government, on the other hand, enables it to sacrifice to its ruling passion or interest both the public good and the rights of other citizens. When the majority is the faction, Madison is saying, we got a problem. Because then the Republican principle of majority rule will allow the majority faction to do its deed, to do what it chooses to do, to sacrifice the public interest, the public good, and the rights of other citizens to its ruling passion or interest. Then Madison lays out the challenge to government in a republic. To secure the public good and private rights, property, against the danger of such a faction, against the threat of majority rule, and at the same time to preserve the spirit and the form of popular government, is then the great object to which our inquiries are directed. Our challenge, Madison said, is to find a way to prevent the majority faction from forming and seizing power in order to exercise its will. Because the Republican system, popular government, is susceptible to majority rule. Somehow, we've got to make sure that the majority can never organize. How is this attainable? Madison says, by what means is this object attainable? How do we do this? He said, evidently by one of two only. There are two ways to accomplish this. Either the existence of the same passion or interest in a majority at the same time must be prevented, or the majority, having such coexistent passion or interest, must be rendered by their number and local situation unable to concert and carry into effect schemes of oppression. Translation: either we must make sure that there's never a majority, or if there is such a majority, we've got to find a way to make sure it can't organize. Because once it organizes, our popular government is susceptible to majority rule and we lose. That's the challenge. If the impulse and the opportunity be suffered to coincide, in other words, if we allow the desire to organize and the opportunity to pull it off to come together, we well know that neither moral nor religious motives can be relied on as an adequate control. Once the majority organizes, it'll seize power. It has its own interest at heart, and now it has the power within the Republican system to get its way. We can't let this happen. From this view of the subject, Madison says, it may be concluded that pure democracy, by which I mean a society consisting of a small number of citizens who assemble and administer the government in person, can admit of no cure for the mischiefs of faction. A common passion or interest will, in almost every case, be felt by a majority of the whole. A communication and concert result from the form of government itself, and there's nothing to check the inducements to sacrifice the weaker party or an obnoxious individual. That's the issue. Once we allow the majority to organize in a popular government, we are in trouble. Here's Madison's formula to address that danger. A republic, by which I mean a government in which the scheme of representation takes place, opens a different prospect and promises the cure for which we are seeking. Let us examine the points in which it varies from pure democracy, and we shall comprehend both the nature of the cure and the efficacy which it must derive from the Union. What Madison is saying is pure democracy is not a solution to our problem. It is our problem. And the Republican form of government is the way to address it. The two great points of difference, Madison says, between a democracy and a republic are, first, the delegation of the government in the latter, in a republic, to a small number of citizens elected by the rest. The reason a republic is our only answer is that in a republic, the will of the people is delegated to representatives. Secondly, the greater number of citizens and greater sphere of territory over which the latter may be extended. Majority rule democracy can only happen in small places where people can get together and organize. But in a greater sphere of country, in a larger area, with larger districts, you make it less likely that the majority will indeed even exist. And if it does, they'll be so spread out over the large territory that they'll be unable to organize. And that means that if the majority cannot organize, then the minority governs, makes the decisions. The effect of the first difference, which is the delegation of government in a republic to a small number of citizens elected by the rest, the effect of this first difference is, on the one hand, to refine and enlarge the public views by passing them through the medium of a chosen body of citizens whose wisdom may best discern the true interest of their country and whose patriotism and love of justice will be least likely to sacrifice it to temporary or partial considerations. What Madison is saying is the first advantage of a republic is that the power of the people is transferred from the majority faction to elected representatives, to a chosen body of citizens whose wisdom may best discern the true interest of their country and whose patriotism and love of justice will be least likely to sacrifice it to temporary or partial considerations. Under such a regulation, Madison says, it may well happen that the public voice pronounced by the representatives of the people will be more consonant to the public good than if pronounced by the people themselves, convened for the purpose. What Madison is saying here is that the public good is an absolute. he's talking in philosophical terms. And what he's saying is there is a public good. There is a right thing or a best thing for government to do. But the majority is never going to realize it and never going to fulfill it, because the majority is captivated only by their own self-interest, their own passions, and their own ability to satisfy their own self-interest. The only way that the public good can be realized is by passing the public will, the will of the people, through this chosen body of citizens, these representatives, whose patriotism and love of justice will be able to put the public interest first and self-interest second. In this system, Madison says, the public good is probably better off in the hands of the representatives than the people themselves. The people themselves are so driven by self-interest that they can't even recognize the public good. Only the representatives can. Only the few can. Therefore, the advantage of the republic is to allow the masses of people to participate, but never allow them to become a majority, because once they do, they seize the power rather than give it to the representatives. The second advantage, of course, is the size of the constituency that a republic will work in. By spreading the constituency out, you take in so many factions, so many competing interests, that you make it less likely that there is even a majority. And even if there is a majority, they are so spread out that they will be unable to organize. And as long as you can keep them from organizing, then the decisions will be made by the representatives rather than by the people. The only way in a popular government that the representatives can lose the power to make decisions is when they are confronted by a majority. What is the point of returning to Federalist number 10 here within the context of the Hamilton, Aaron Burr, Jefferson, Catiline discussion that we've had in our first hour today and toward the end of our second hour yesterday? How does Federalist number 10 fit into this? Let me explain. Madison's formula for preventing majority rule in this country through the creation of representative government has maintained stability and balance in the republic for most of its history until now. In this election that was just held a month ago, on November 8th, we witnessed the very worst thing that Madison could have envisioned in this republic. And that is, we allowed the masses of the people to select the president. Oh, we had an electoral college, all right. But the electoral college made it possible for the majority for the masses of the people to elect their candidate over the candidate that got the bulk of the majority vote. In a sense, what we did in this past election is violate Madison's principles in Federalist number 10. Instead of allowing the will of the people to be filtered through an elected body of representatives who were best able to choose a quality president, what many of us did was leave the choice to the people that Madison believed were least qualified to make that choice. We knew during the campaign that the people who were showing up at the huge rallies that Donald Trump's campaign featured were the people who were the least educated. They were the unemployed or the underemployed. They were not college graduates. The fact of the matter is, we know that the most educated people in this country, those with college degrees, would not vote for Donald Trump. But instead of exercising their will, many of them stayed home. They didn't like either choice. So many of them refused to participate. I mentioned yesterday at our Rotary meeting here that we had a table discussion at lunch yesterday about the coming ascendancy of the Trump administration to power on January 20th. And one of the people at the table made the point and said, many of my friends, most of them Republican, stayed home and didn't vote because they couldn't stomach either candidate. Both candidates were negative, to the point that many of these people stayed home. They boycotted the election. In the process, what they allowed to happen by staying home was that they allowed the will of the most disgruntled, frustrated, angry individuals to choose the president. And the Electoral College enabled them to do it. It sounds like what I'm suggesting here is a rationalization for abolishing the Electoral College. When in a sense, when we dealt with this a couple of weeks ago, I made the point that this is not time to get rid of the Electoral College, because the Electoral College is an institutional check on popular rule. What we did is surrender the decision-making to the individuals in this country that most of us will willingly believe, were least qualified to make this decision. And all of us are living with the results, and we're scared to death by it. The key factor, the factor that more than anything else makes Madison's Federalist number 10 inoperative, is social media. Donald Trump, in his 60 Minutes interview with Leslie Stahl, made the point that social media got him elected. He said that. He has more than 16 million people on his Twitter account. That means that he has instantaneous contact with more than 16 million people. When he becomes president, he commits to his intention to continue to use Twitter. My guess is that many more people than the 16 million he's in contact with now will want to be in his Twitter account. Think of it. What citizen does not want to be in immediate contact with the President of the United States? What that means is Donald Trump has immediate access to a huge constituency of people in this country who are looking to him to fix everything that's wrong and save them from oblivion. And he realizes that it's that constituency that got him elected. He made sure that his campaign catered to and appealed to that particular constituency. The pollsters missed it. The media missed it. Donald Trump recognized it and cultivated it. And now he's got it. Many people are relying on the stability of the republic to keep Donald Trump in check. I would suggest to you that it's going to be difficult for politicians to do that when the president is in immediate contact with well over 16 million citizens. He can bring the pressure of majority power to bear on any politician who dares to oppose him. And he has a track record of seeking revenge, of a commitment to get even with those who cross him. The question is the new Republican majority in both houses going to be able to contain and control and create or establish limits to what he does as president? I would suggest that this is a very, very dubious question. Many people believe that the Republic is stable enough to withstand this. I would suggest, if you believe that Madison's formula for preserving stability in this republic, which is the delegation of power from the masses of the people to their elected representatives, if you believe that that indeed has been the principal factor which has kept the ship of state afloat for all of these years, then I would suggest that Donald Trump's access and appreciation of the power of social media would suggest that there are serious problems with the assumption that the Republic is basically stable. I would suggest that the potential of the Trump candidacy and presidency, in light of the use of Twitter and his commitment to continue to use it as president, suggests that he is going to be able to bring the power of millions to bear on the political system, a system of politicians who will never be able to stand up to the will of the voters. In a sense, then, I think that what we have done in this past election is to surrender, without even knowing it, to the destruction of the institutional checks and balances which the founders built into this republic. We have basically stood back and allowed the most frustrated and the most disgruntled of our population to choose the president. Social media gives that president the opportunity for instantaneous communication with these people. He can bring their political power to bear on any issue at any time that he chooses. And he has demonstrated over and over again that not only is he aware of that power, but that he will use it. Just yesterday, when the Republican majority, in secret, made the decision to disband, to eliminate the Congressional Ethics Committee, Donald Trump immediately took to Twitter and criticized that decision by telling the Republican leadership that there are a lot more important things to being done that need to be done than that. And lo and behold, the Republican Party backed off. I would suggest to you that, to me, is an indication that as politicians, these people are unlikely to stand up to the will of a president with that kind of popular power behind him. That's why I believe that Federalist Number 10 makes perfect sense in this particular context, because I think it allows us to appreciate the threats to the republic that currently exist and the vulnerability of the checks and balances system that the founders created to contain these threats. I believe that this is one incredible story. And again, I don't mean to appear to be a pessimist. I tend to be one of the most optimistic people in the world. And I think if you had an opportunity to ask my wife, she would tell you that I'm an opportunist to the fall. I am an optimist to a fault. She believes that oftentimes I'm illusionary. I'm so optimistic in things. Somehow I believe that the best will happen. I continue to believe that. But I do believe that we're in for a rough ride. And on our Facebook page and in several of the postings that I put up recently, I basically concluded by saying this. I think all of us need to hold on, because I think for a while we're going to be in for a rough ride until the system is able to re-secure its sense of balance. Anyway, that's kind of the issue here, and I do hope that that I'm being perhaps overly negative on some of these things. I want to maintain my optimism, but at the same time, there are so many people whose ability and whose intelligence I respect, who are expressing serious worry and serious concern about some of the things that might happen. Basically, what we are confronting is a presidential candidate who was successfully elected, who basically committed to the idea that everything that one can associate with the establishment was on the table for change. And the constituency behind that candidate, the constituency that got him elected, is the most frustrated, angry, negativistic constituency possible. They want change irrespective of what might be lost in the process. Because from their perspective, anything that might happen is better than what we know will happen under the establishment. In that kind of a scenario, I don't believe that Hillary Clinton had a chance of being elected. I don't believe so. I think I think many of the reports suggest that that too much of the Clinton campaign focused on states that she naively believed she had a chance to win, and caused her to take for granted many of the states that she assumed were in the Democratic column: Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, Michigan, Ohio, Florida. Instead of concentrating her efforts there to make sure that she won those states, she basically took them for granted, bought into the optimism of the pollsters who suggested that she was going to win, and suggested that she even had the opportunity to win in states where Democrats traditionally didn't have much of a chance. And so consequently, she spent the last couple of weeks of the campaign in those places rather than in the Michigans and the Pennsylvanias and the Wisconsins and the Ohios, where it turns out she should have been, because Donald Trump won them all. And the question is, depending on what he does in 4 years, there are some people believe that he likely won't win them again. And it seems to me that that's where the Democratic opportunities lie, in making sure that they reclaim the territory that they lost in this election. I think it's a fantastic story. I'm kind of looking at the old clock on the wall here, and we've got about 7 minutes to go in our campaign, in our program today. Let me share with you one additional thing, which is totally off the subject. But in the course of my reading, I came across an op-ed piece in today's New York Times by Thomas Friedman. We visited Thomas Friedman before. I know a lot of people don't like him. But let me suggest to you that he has a column in today's New York Times that I believe is worthy of a read. Its title, From Hands to Heads to Hearts. Basically, the theme of Tom Friedman's piece in today's New York Times is the degree to which technology is competing with human beings in their ability to think. He goes to Dov Seidman, who's CEO of an organization called LRN, which advises companies on leadership and how to build ethical cultures. And this is what Seidman tells Friedman, quote, "What we are experiencing today bears striking similarities in size and implications to the scientific revolution that began in the 16th century. The discoveries of Copernicus and Galileo, which spurred the scientific revolution, challenged our whole understanding of the world around and beyond us, and forced us as humans to rethink our place within that world." Descartes, in his famous statement, "I think, therefore I am," pretty much captured the significance of the scientific revolution. That what made humans special and different from all other living things on earth was our ability to think. But now we are developing software and technology that competes with people in thinking. So the question that Friedman raises in this article, what makes human beings unique? It used to be, as a result of the scientific revolution, that human beings could think, machines couldn't. But now we have reached the point where we are developing machines that can think. Friedman points out, software has started to write poetry, write sports stories and business news. IBM's Watson is co-writing pop hits. Uber has begun deploying self-driving taxis in city streets. And just last month, Amazon delivered its first package by drone to a customer in rural England. What is left for human beings that makes them unique? If technology has reached the level of thinking that competes with human being. Seidman's advice to Tom Friedman is that what continues to make human beings unique and different from machines is the existence of the one thing that machines can never have, which is a heart. Seidman explains it this way. Whereas, as a result of the scientific revolution, Descartes was able to say, "I think, therefore I am." What makes human beings unique today is the ability to say, "I care, therefore I am. I hope, therefore I am. I imagine, therefore I am. I'm ethical, therefore I am. I have a purpose, therefore I am. I pause and reflect, therefore I am." And it strikes me as I go back to the very famous dialogue between the heart and the head in Thomas Jefferson's famous letter to Maria Causeway in 1786, in which he has the classic debate, the classic dialogue. between a world driven by the cognitive and a world driven by the heart, by feelings, by sensitivities, by love and caring and hope. I think Friedman has touched on an issue in his column today that all of us would be well advised to give a read. It's interesting, the title of Seidman's book is Why How We Do Anything Means Everything. He points out in that book that in an industrial economy, it was about hired hands. In the knowledge economy, it was about hired heads. In the technological revolution, it's the human economy. It's about the value and the hiring of hearts. The ability of human beings to connect on a level, on an emotional level, that is not driven by cognition, but is driven by sensitivity and by concern one person for another. It's very interesting that as I read this, I was thinking back to Pope Francis's encyclical that he wrote in June of 2015 on the environment and the need to incorporate the moral question into all kinds of corporate and economic decisions. In other words, to make sure that economic development considered the moral question in making its decisions. With that, I think we've reached the end of our time today as well as this week. We're at 58 minutes after the hour. I want to thank you for your willingness to join us on the Virtual Center. I appreciate the support of the Head On Radio Network, of Bob Kincaid, Agnes, and the folks at Head On who continue to support this program. But most of all, I want to thank those of you who continue to support it and who continue to listen. And I do invite you to think and reflect about some of these things. We won't be back together again until the 1st of next week. I encourage you to think about many of the things we've talked about today. And if you've had something you'd like to throw into the pot, by all means, plan to give us a call when we get back on the air next Monday. We'll be back at our regular time, 1 p.m. on next Monday. This is Bill O'Brien for the Virtual Center. I hope you have a great evening, a wonderful, wonderful weekend. Be kind to each other, and thank you.